Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Grab your notepads, grab your pens, because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment that you will jot down at least one action item that you will implement in your business today. Remember, that's what this is all about, implementation to drive your business forward. Now, we are in the home stretch. We are continuing our discussion about waste, Muda, the 7 forms of waste, but there is an 8th form of waste that was later introduced, and we're going to call that the bonus. So there's one more concept we're going to cover after today, but really I would say this is the home stretch. We are covering our 7th video in the 7 main forms, or the original 7 forms of waste of Muda. And today we will be talking about overproduction. And how I'll present this material to you is we will talk about some general premises that you need to grasp in order to sort of understand and mitigate against the effects of overproduction. And then we'll give you some common causes of it. And finally, we'll cover some ways to avoid overproduction. Now, I'm going to, just like in the other videos in the rest of this playlist, I'm going to provide you with the notes that I put on the screen, the slide deck, and we'll make that as available as a link in the description for a free download. And all you have to do is input your name and your email address. We'll send you out a PDF. So you don't have to jot down any of the stuff you see on the screen. And I also want to remind you that if you haven't covered the general concept of Muda and waste, we have videos in which we cover that a lot less, much more of a overall summary of the concept. And then in these videos, we're doing a deeper dive, but there's nothing chronological about this. And although you may wish to go back and watch those videos first, I highly recommend you watch them at some point. Watch all of the videos, and that'll make sure that you get the most robust knowledge and understanding of this concept, because it's so critical to making you more effective in running your business and making you more effective as a manager. But you don't have to run away just now, because it's not really important that you make these chronological. Now, I did intentionally make the overproduction the last one, and there's a reason for that. But let me bring up on the screen the notes that we're going to follow along here with. So as I mentioned, we're going to start off with some general premises that you should accept regarding overproduction. And the first one is that various forms of waste are inherent in all production. So when we talk about production, once again, I want to remind you, it doesn't matter whether you are actually manufacturing a physical product or you are delivering on a service. Both are covered in when I talk about production. The production of your service, that is the administration and the delivery of your service to people, is the same sort of concept as somebody who is manufacturing a physical product that they deliver to a customer. So we understand that all forms of waste are inherent, and we can never eliminate the 7 forms of waste. So all we're trying to do is we're trying to minimize them to the greatest extent possible. So the first one here is understanding that in any production, there are various forms of waste. And you might say, well, why are you bringing that up as it relates to overproduction? And it's because of the second point here, which is overproduction is considered the worst form of waste, since it inherently consists of all other forms of waste. So when we were talking about motion, for example, just because you are engaging in motion doesn't mean necessarily that you're engaging in all the other forms of waste. Just because you engage in conveyance doesn't mean you're necessarily overproducing something. But if you are engaging in overproduction, that means creating more of your product or service, having capacities beyond what is necessary to meet your demands. It's sort of more of a loosely interpreted way of wording it. I'm trying to be inclusive of, like I said, both products and services, but essentially creating more inventory of your final availability of your product or service than the market has demand for. Inherent in that is all the other forms of waste, because in order to deliver that product or service, you will engage in those other forms of waste. I hope that makes sense to you. It's pretty clear to me Overproduction is the worst. All right, number 3, ignorance and change are the enemies of precise planning. Hedge against both. You're going to find that it really comes down to avoiding the perils of overproduction is you want to avoid ignorance and change. Now, of course, we can't be omniscient. You are not going to be all-knowing. So there is going to be a degree of ignorance for all of us. And there's a lot of ignorance. And then, of course, change is necessary. In fact, we want positive change. Change is unavoidable. So both ignorance and change are unavoidable, but they are also the enemies of precise planning. So you want to hedge against both. That is to say, you want to put a safety net in place in acknowledgement that they do exist. Number 4, market demands fluctuate. Accept that, understand that. That's part of that change we're talking about. Market demands fluctuate. If you think that the market is consistent and will never change, therefore the amount that you've produced all along will always be the amount that you should produce, that's just bad. Of course, supply, or rather demands in the market, can go up and down, and you're hopefully going to take advantage of greater demands, and you're going to be able to continue to increase your production. But we're talking today about overproduction, and the premise here is that market demands will fluctuate. Number 5, careful analysis of the most accurate and current data is invaluable in the avoidance of overproduction. Now, I didn't by mistake include accurate and current. Both are very important. Data, you know, I'm always about the measurement, measure. So once again, as with all forms of Muda, good data will help you avoid having this form of waste. All right, let's move on to the causes. The number 1, well, I already said this, ignorance and unexpected change are the 2 fundamental causes of overproduction. So everything else we cover will be about either ignorance or unexpected change. So these examples that we're giving and these causes, they really come down to those 2 things. So the first one is invalid projections. Now, I've got a whole video on projections. In fact, I probably have more than one, but I've got one on projections, you know, your targets. You need to be planning for your business. You need to have a business plan and a strategy each year regarding your production. You need to anticipate and project how much the market will demand of you. So invalid projections come down to any of the following things. Insufficient data in calculations. So you might be trying to actually do some math. You're doing a spreadsheet, you're trying to do your projections, and you just don't have enough data. Maybe your business is too new, and or you have failed to collect data in the past. And we want to rely on good data, but if you don't have enough of it, then it's more guesswork. It's really just an educated guess. And one of the reasons that your projections can be invalid is because your guess was wrong because you didn't have enough data. The next one there is errors in data or calculations. I'm aware of businesses that have gone out of business due to making errors, mathematical errors. We're talking about like decimal points here where, you know, maybe you're bidding on a job and you underbid or you overbid, you're losing work, or you're committing to work that you can't afford because of errors in calculation. Is very critical to make sure that you're having someone check the math. It could just be a formula. Often we're using fairly complex formulas to estimate our needs for business these days. And if you're the only person doing it, or your accountant is the only person doing it, your controller or whatever, there is more, you're more prone to error there. So have different people check one another's work so that you avoid errors in calculations. Or it could be just errors in data. Maybe some of the input that you're putting in is from a bad source. You know, maybe you just, it's the formulas you have, the calculations, the math is actually working out right, but you're inputting bad information for whatever reason. Somebody told you a data point and you relied on them. It could be a news source, it could be some industry journal or something like that, and you put that in, and that's part of your formula. And even though the math is working out right, the data point was bad. You were given bad information. Historical based calculations dating back too long. This is a really critical one. Remember before I said you need accurate and current data. If you are trying to project for the market demands so that you know how much to produce, so you can prepare your business to be able to meet the demands and avoid overproduction, and if you go back too far in the effort to get more data, you can trick yourself. And I've done this before. Inventory management, where I was very proud of all the calculations I was doing and was really precise, and we had so much data. And you know, the more data you have, the more accurate it should do. It should take out the outlying data points and everything, but that's part of the problem. It made me blind to a change in the market because my data points were going back too far. I was going back 12 months and even 24 months and looking at historical sales. And I didn't realize that about 2 or 3 months ago, sales changed in a significant way and they were trending downward on a particular product. And therefore I was planning how much of that product I would need, and it fell off the radar. I was over projecting, and I continue to do that. You can imagine if you consider a rolling average of 12 or 24 months in terms of a mathematical formula, you're bringing that until those changes occur. You're going to be 12 or 24 months into the future before you're changing in a rapid drop in demand. And so make sure you're looking at current data. You can still look at the average data over 12 or 24 months, but maybe you're weighting in terms of your formula, in terms of your mathematical projections, how you're going to do it. You're weighting the most current month as much more heavily. It's like, well, what happened last month? What happened over the last quarter? This is much more relevant than what happened over the last 10 years. Something that happened for 5 years in a row may have changed completely. We all know that, but it's not always obvious when you're trying and you're priding yourself on making good projections. Projections are just a guess, and they're only as accurate as the data you're putting in, and make sure you're cognizant of possible changes. The other one I've got down here is overly ambitious. And so that happens. Sometimes you really are passionate about your product and you're really eager and enthusiastic about the prospects for your future, and you're overly ambitious, so you guessed way too aggressively in terms of how much demand there would be. That's in my style. I'm pretty aggressive and assertive, and I'm very ambitious, and therefore when I'm projecting, I'm pretty optimistic and I think things are going to go really well. So be careful on that. That's another reason that your projections can be wrong and can add to overproduction if you're just simply over ambitious. Sudden or unexpected market changes, that should be obvious. We talked about ignorance and unexpected change. So markets do change and you need to acknowledge that, and so often. So think about it and be honest with yourself. In your business, who's responsible for coming up with the projections and trying to make determinations of how much you're going to have in terms of raw materials, how much labor you're going to have, how many resources you're going to make available based on those projections, and are you factoring in the possibility of a sudden or unexpected market change? And it can be very difficult to do. But we'll talk about that on the next slide when we talk about ways to avoid this. Market distortions, and the example I've got up on the screen here is government interference. Sometimes everything that you are intuitively putting together into your projections makes sense. It's very logical, and you just can't figure out, why is this not working? Why is this going wrong? Well, there may be a market distortion. Sometimes the government interferes and markets are not behaving the way they ordinarily would, left to the freedom of a free market economy. And so you want to be careful on that. If there are new legislation, there's new restrictions, all these types of things, government interference, central authority interference, we have a whole video on that. Check that out. That can distort your market and cause your projections to be inaccurate. And then of course, black swan events, which is that unpredicted one-off thing that happens. It might be a once in a lifetime, hopefully, scenario that can change everything, and it's catastrophic. You just didn't realize this was going to happen. However, we know that they do happen, and so there's still ways that you can avoid that. Cancellation of orders is another one, and that falls under unexpected change. So you might have buyer's remorse. So you've made orders, and maybe you are actually producing stuff to order. And some of you have businesses that you're not engaged in production or ordering of raw materials or whatever until you have orders. Although most of you are trying to project into the future so that you can have more rapid response to customer demands. And but if an order gets canceled, and I see this with contracts, so maybe you're in home building or something like that, and you have a long turnaround time in the process, and a customer changes his mind, and all of a sudden you've overproduced. You've got commitments in place, and what are you going to do about that? Most industries that have such major commitments involved in moving forward with production, they will take deposits and that kind of stuff. And that's part of the way they try to mitigate against that. Another one is competitive interference. So you might be producing based on a customer order, and then that customer is approached by a competitor, or a new competitor enters the market, or an alternative product or service to yours comes into the market, and the customer cancels his order. So I've decided, no, we've got a whole video on competitive forces. We cover Porter's 5 forces and competition in general. You should check that out. But this is one of the reasons that you may be engaged in overproduction, is the cancellation of orders. And there are, of course, different strategies that different industries and businesses put in place to avoid that. Another one, and this is a big one, sometimes I say, can you actually gain value through overproduction or through a particular form of waste? And then it wouldn't actually be defined as waste if it worked out. Well, I've got strategic gamble up here, because you may have decided that I'm going to strike while the iron's hot. So maybe you see there's a real demand out there right now. Something has caused it. There could be even a natural disaster. We've heard stories about people providing some sort of relief to natural disasters and stuff, and so they really commit and go all in and invest on inventory and stuff like this to be able to produce things that are helping or helpful to those people that are affected. Whatever it may be, there could be real influx of demand, and you gamble on that. You're like, well, I'm going to change my production to make sure I have ample supply, because I'm going to strike while the iron's hot. People want this right now. I'm going to give it to them. And so that if something then changes and it dies down right away, you can be stuck with a lot of extra inventory and you've overproduced. You may also strategically decide you want to gain market share. I've done this very successfully. I decided, as much as it was wasteful, I'm going to gamble on overproduction. I'm going to make sure I have all my resources producing as much as we possibly can, even beyond what our historical data supports us being likely able to sell, because I wanted to undercut my competition and I wanted to gain market share. And once I did that, I thought that will pay off in the future, and I can return to more reasonable profit levels once I've done that. And it also has a synergistic effect on other parts of the business and this kind of thing. So you might consider that you are going to offer some products or services as a loss leader, and then later you will, in another part of the business, or you'll be able to improve your margins once you've picked up that market share. That's very strategic. It works sometimes, and to the degree that it doesn't work, you would have overproduced. Another one is the transitory ease of access to resources. I've got up here like cheap money. Maybe interest rates are super low right now, and you're like, hey, it costs money to be engaged in this production. I'm going to actually double down because I can get capital right now. I can invest because of cheap money, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that because this is not going to last. There might be a special on or something like that. Dormant labor. So it may be that there is in your market a bunch of dormant labor. There's some talent that you can pick up again on the cheap, so to speak, and you decide, well, I'm going to produce right now because I can't always rely on getting this labor, and I'm going to hire while others do not, because I do anticipate the market's going to get back up, and I will have the team. I will have sort of cornered the market on the labor, and I don't want to keep them dormant. So I've got this labor, so we're going to produce, and we're going to produce at a lower margin, and it's going to be wasteful for now, but it'll pay off in the future. Or a glut of materials. Maybe there's some commodity that you need in order to produce. It wasn't so long ago that there was actual negative values on oil futures, where you could pick up oil futures for basically getting paid on them. They were negative value instead of being $70 a barrel or $65 a barrel, whatever they happen to be when you're watching this video. It wasn't that long ago where they were like negative however much per barrel. It might have been really seriously, I think it went to like negative $40 a barrel or something on oil futures. So if there is a glut of materials that you could invest in that, gambling that that's going to be temporary and it's going to turn around. But of course, you can be involved in overproduction and waste if your gamble doesn't pay off. All right, let's look at the ways to avoid overproduction. The first one is to measure and collect relevant data. I've got up there, your sales history is a big one. In trying to project into the future, your sales history is the best place to start. And I've already emphasized recent data in my anecdote about where I overproduced because I was looking back too far. Make sure you weigh heavily in your projections on your more recent data. Monitor fickle markets, and I've got 3 points up there. You want to look at your overall market conditions, that is the economy, and certainly the local economy. I mean, you may look at your national or even the international global economy, but what's most relevant is where you compete, where you operate, your market. So take a look at the economy. How's the overall market conditions, and is that likely to increase your demands or decrease your demands? Look at industry trends. The market can be on fire, but it doesn't necessarily mean your industry. So I've seen in, say, automotive markets where due to very high oil prices, automotive markets were affected because people weren't buying trucks or sport utilities because the price of gasoline was so high and so on, even though the economy may have been booming for other reasons. So you see that the economy may be booming because you're in a oil-based economy or something like that, like in Calgary, or you're in Houston, one of these areas that people are making really good money when the price of oil is high, but consumer behaviors may be affected by that as well. So you look at your industry trends. Just because the overall economy is booming, even your local market economy can be booming. That doesn't mean the bakery industry is booming, or whatever healthcare industry you're in. Maybe there's been some bad press coverage of something related to your industry. Also keep keep your fingers on the pulse of your organization. When you're looking at the fickle nature of the markets, you also look in your organization. Changes happen in your organization that can really affect demands for the future and your ability to reply or respond to them. So you want to make sure, again, going back to that data, you're considering your organizational data. Decentralize intelligence and planning. This is really big, and it's something I harp on. We've got several videos on the benefits of decentralization. I've got 3 points up there. One is 2 heads are better than one. And that means when you decentralize, if you're not relying strictly on your own data or your own intelligence, you're going to be better off. So consider collaborating, communicating across your entire team and putting your heads together. Your cumulative, your collective intelligence is far better. And since we said that ignorance is the enemy, we're all ignorant to a certain extent. We don't have information about all things at all times. We're not omniscient. And so you have to, or you would be best off to consider other sources. So it's still okay if you're the one who's responsible for those projections and for planning your production. It's still okay for you to go with what you originally thought or what your gut is telling you, but at least gain that decentralized intelligence from as many places as possible. And that doesn't just mean your internal team. You can talk to competitors. Pick up the phone and call your competitor. Maybe you have a good relationship with them and you can say, how are things over there? We're thinking about this. What are your thoughts on the upcoming year? These types of conversations. Also, there may be industry associations and things that you can rely on. Decentralize the intelligence, get it from as many places. Go on to YouTube, Google things, look at the news, look wherever you can to get reliable data. Now, it's up to you to be able to discern what is good and bad and where are the reliable sources and find those sources. Spend some time throughout, your career hand picking is what I'm trying to say, the best sort of sources of data, and then try to continue to improve that, because as you decentralize that, you get a more well-rounded picture of what's going on. Also, the double check effect. When you decentralize intelligence and planning, it has inherently built into it where you're double and triple checking one another's work. Remember, I talked about, say, in the mathematical formulas, if you have it all centralized to one person, one accountant or controller doing the math, then there can be errors. But it's more than that. It's like somebody else on your team, where we talk about the two heads are better than one, says, hey, I understand that they put this new regulation in place in another country or in another province, another state, whatever it happens to be. I wonder if that's coming, if we're gonna see that here as well. And nobody else on the team even heard of that. It's like, oh, really? Is that accurate? Hey, show me where you picked up that information. That might go in. And then somebody else pops up and says, yeah, no, I heard about that as well, but our local government has said that will never happen here or whatever. So you're sort of double checking. You're getting that two heads are better than one, and you're offsetting one another's information and double checking it. And then the personality balancing effect is a big one. I mentioned that I was very ambitious and aggressive. If you decentralize your intelligence and planning, you may have somebody else on the team who is a lot more level-headed, or maybe they're more temperate or moderate in their approach to doing things. They're not quite as ambitious. They are more negative even. They are pessimistic about the future, where you may be very optimistic, and it has that balancing effect, and you're less likely to make a mistake when you have more things. Again, to the extent that you're the boss, you get to make the final decision, that's all well and good, but you should value this input. You should value people who don't agree with you. You should value pushback and create a culture where you can take advantage of that. The other thing you can do to avoid overproduction is to perpetually refine and improve value, because when you do that, you increase demand. And overproduction is often the case of, if you had demand exceeding what you had produced, then you wouldn't have overproduced by definition. So when you perpetually refine, when you're continuously improving the value equation, you're going to continually get market forces increasing demand for what you have. So that's a great way to avoid overproduction. Manage customer expectations. We talked about customer changing their mind. You can do things throughout your marketing and throughout your customer experience to manage those expectations and to offset buyer's remorse, and to make sure that doesn't happen, where you reinforce their decisions and you make them feel committed, that kind of thing. The other one I have here is big. It says reduce transactional turnaround times. And I've got that quote from Elon Musk. Speed is a fundamental determinant in the competitiveness of any company. This is critical. So if you have a type of business that the turnaround time is very long, and I deal with some businesses and vendors that the turnaround time is very long compared to others, and so there's that cooling off period, and there's maybe an opportunity for me to change my mind and that kind of thing. Whereas if they were to shorten that transactional turnaround time, then they are mitigating against the ability for me to change my mind. And also, if I'm enjoying the product, it's like too late to change my mind. It's like, well, now I've got the product. So just think about the difference between you and a competitor of 1 day. Maybe your turnaround time is 2 days, his turnaround time is 3 days. Well, your customers on average are enjoying the product a day earlier. There's 1 day that's like a third of the time reduction in the risk of customer changing their orders. So that's a really big one. Ensure against catastrophe. And I mean literally, you can actually hire an insurance company, pay insurance premiums to mitigate against catastrophe, and you should do that because you have to understand that it does happen. And how this relates to overproduction, maybe you might think, well, insurance in general has to do with other forms of catastrophe. But if you are overproducing in such a way that you can lead to catastrophe, then maybe it's not an actual physical insurance policy premium that you're paying, but you're insuring against it by acknowledging that this can happen, and you're actually putting things in place organizationally, strategically in your organization, that when it does happen, we have an exit plan. And that really relates to this next one, which is rapid response to the evidence. If the data is telling you that you gambled wrong, your strategic risk that you took to overproduce in hopes of gaining market share, striking while the iron's hot, taking advantage of cheap resources, this kind of thing, as soon as you realize it's not paying off, you need to liquidate. You need to reduce that overproduction. You need to get rid of that costly waste. Respond immediately. Don't have this escalating commitment. It's like, well, we're all in, so let's just keep going. And don't have this confirmation bias either, where you're ignoring the evidence because it's too painful to realize that you guessed wrong. Instead, once again, with the decentralization of your intelligence and planning, you collaborate and communicate with other team members and other stakeholders, and you respond once you guys realize, hey, the writing's on the wall. Hey, you can always increase your production again in the future, but when you realize you are overproducing and you're getting inventory that you're producing, mark that down, liquidate it. And even if you are a service, your time of your people with that specialized knowledge, that's your inventory. So liquidate that. Offer discounts for people to schedule and to book with you right away. Offer specials and work with your marketing team to make sure you communicate that. And again, rapid response to the evidence, and don't ignore the evidence. So there we go. That's your overproduction. That's all of the 7 forms of waste. I hope you've managed to make it through all of these. If you haven't, go back and check each of those videos, and you should have taken down some notes. Your homework assignment today is to look back over these notes, to go ahead and download the notes that I'm going to make available to you, and then just check with your own plan and talk with the stakeholders in your business and ascertain whether or not there are things you can do to avoid overproduction. Are there strategic ways that you can engage in possibly some overproduction to add value, to gain you a leg up on the competition? And that's what you want to do. You want to continue to strategize and plan and reduce waste as much as possible. We already accept the idea, the premise that it's inherent. There is waste, there's wastefulness in production of all businesses. You can't eliminate it entirely, but you can perpetually refine. You can continually improve. You can continue to engage in the process of evaluating, analyzing where waste exists, and trying to reduce it. Reduce, measure. That's where I want to leave it today. I hope you got something out of this, and don't forget, if there's something you want for me to cover in one of these videos, we also have a link in the description where you can fill out a form and you can anonymously get us to cover a topic that's very relevant and specific to your business. And I get those, and I'll record a video on that, and I won't bring up which business or the name if it's important to you, that anonymity. So check that out if you want. And by all means, leave a comment if you thought of something that I completely skipped over. I often, after the end of the video, go, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this point or whatever. That's what the comments are for. Leave a comment, either agree with me, disagree with me, push back. Leave a comment that somebody else can read and learn something from, because we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.